Apple announced a lot, and I'm sure by now you've seen a ton of videos about those announcements, but this is the one video about the one thing that matters the most. Let's talk about Apple Intelligence. I get it. AI is not new. A lot of what was announced is also not new. But no matter how jaded you are to all of this or technology in general, I'm asking you to take a step back and just hear me out, because the intention, the purpose behind Apple Intelligence is new. A game changer. Quite literally, after this, nothing will be the same. Not just for Apple, but for everyone else, too. Apple Intelligence was the final, massive piece of a puzzle that has been quietly assembled for the better part of a decade, where all of the small tweaks and additions made to iOS and other operating systems and the billions of dollars spent on Apple Silicon are now going to operate in complete harmony. Apple has already been planting so many AI seeds amongst all of their software just without actually calling it AI. The Photos app on your iPhone has been using AI for organization, recognition, and other things. The computational processing that happens every time you take a photo is AI. AI is in your keyboard. Hey, ever wonder how Face ID works? Yep, machine learning there too. Noise awareness in AirPods? Like, do I really need to list everything? Last year, while being interviewed by CNBC, Apple was asked directly if they are nervous about how far ahead their competitors are in terms of AI. And as their response, they laughed.
AI. Critics have been surprised that Apple appears to be falling behind when it comes to AI. How do you respond?
I don't believe we are.
Not too worried.
Not too worried.
They laughed in not a rude way towards the reporter, but instead just out of sheer confidence. They knew something was coming that we didn't. And now, fast forward many months later, it turns out that laugh was justified. Every aspect and feature of iOS, iPadOS, macOS, and so much more was just intrinsically tied together and interconnected under a single entity. The same entity that would have been laughed off the stage if this was announced only a handful of years ago. Because Apple Intelligence has a face. And that face is Siri. Siri has become the linchpin of the entire Apple ecosystem, and that's kind of hilarious because just last week, it was a potato. Like, so unbelievably bad, nearly useless since it was announced. And somehow it's gone from useless to foundation shifting almost overnight. AI for
the rest of us
is what they're calling this. And at face value, that's pretty clever but cliche marketing. But dive a little deeper, and you'll see a similar pattern to what we saw with Apple Watch. Could you buy activity trackers, blood oxygen sensors, sleep trackers all before Apple Watch? Absolutely, but Apple put all of those things onto one device that you were going to wear anyway, and suddenly, all of that becomes passive. Passive for Apple's massive user base. Apple Watch is the single best-selling watch in the world of all watches, and it also just happens to track your health and has saved thousands of lives, unironically. The health trackers and vitals trackers that used to only be available in a doctor's office are now just sitting on the wrist of over 100 million people. Many of you have used AI in many forms from a number of startups, I'm sure. You've used generative AI. You've created AI photos and videos. Some of you might even pay for multiple services that specialize in different avenues of AI. Maybe even your favorite phone manufacturer has created their own AI that maybe you also have to pay extra for. Who's to say, really? But now, suddenly, no accounts on multiple services, no paying for those multiple services. Now, every single one of those avenues for AI exist on the phone you were carrying anyway. All in one place, controlled with guardrails and intention. It's passive and it's free. AI for the rest of us. Suddenly, the immense power of artificial intelligence has been simplified and made accessible to a ridiculous amount of users. From fun things like generating your own quirky emojis, creating personalized funny AI images, to more useful professional things like helping you organize and write emails, summarize meeting notes, and more, to more of the personal things like being contextually aware to your screen, conversations that you are having with people you love, being able to prioritize and summarize your notifications, or getting you all caught up on that group chat you missed the last hour of, to being able to organize and personalize your photos and your memories. Oh, and being able to remind you to pull up the plans that you made last week but definitely totally forgot about. Amazing. That only scratches the surface, and most of that happens on device. My brain can't even fathom that right now. I can only hope that you understand how big of a deal that is. Most of the AI services that exist currently are handling all requests through cloud-based architecture, or by lying and just showing you cute photos of anime girls because that's what you were asking for anyway. And if those requests are being tossed off to some cloud server somewhere, chances are that data is being stored and becomes, not yours anymore. Looking back at how insane the benchmarks for Apple Silicon performance were, even from the original M1 chip, the extra and mostly unneeded power at the time on multiple devices can now suddenly make sense. Apple says you need to have an iPhone 15 Pro or newer to use Apple Intelligence on an iPhone, and your other devices need to at least have an M1 chip to run all of this. And I'd go ahead and guess that the on-device processing is exactly why that is. This is just the start, and every new iPhone after this will be able to do it. And soon, you won't even remember what it was like to use an iPhone without Apple Intelligence. What about the more complex requests that can't happen on device? Well, Apple has two answers for that. One, they've completely engineered from the ground up a system of Apple Silicon devices that act as a private and encrypted cloud server for relevant information from your requests to be sent to, while getting relevant information back. And that's it. Nothing is actually stored on those servers, and Apple says that this is verifiable through third parties, something that almost every other AI startup cannot say. Speaking of other AI companies, Apple signed an agreement with OpenAI to be able to leverage ChatGPT. This is for requests that even Apple doesn't know how to handle yet, more generative stuff. And even when ChatGPT is an option on your iPhone, your phone will ask you first, and it will do that every time. From what Apple showed us, this is full-on integration, not just for iOS, but for every platform that they offer. Like I said, foundational shift happening right here. Even though the first 60% of WWDC was not about Apple Intelligence on the surface, and instead showed new features like customization in iOS and new macOS Sequoia wallpaper, whatever. The stuff the surface level nerds are excited about, nearly every new thing that was announced was actually quietly made possible by AI. Everything just sort of happens in the background. All interactions with Siri are almost completely unchanged from how we interact with it now, rather how you want to interact with it. Siri can just actually do the things you wish it could do. We could be here for hours, deep diving into all the features that were announced, deep diving into potential features that may come in the future. There's so much happening here, but really, the key feature, the killer feature for all of this, is how deeply integrated this is for all of their devices. Remember when Google first debuted the Magic Eraser feature on Pixel phones? People lost their minds over that, and obviously, we were waiting for Apple to come up with an answer to that, and here it is. So thank you, Google, for making a feature so good that it was just bound to trickle down to more of these devices regardless of the company. And that's sort of the point I'm trying to make here. There is no going back from this. And here's what I mean. In the earlier days of Android, one of the biggest pitfalls of the entire thing was fragmentation. Each OEM had their own fork of the software, and none of the devices were consistent. So even if a new version of Android came out, You had to just cross your fingers and hope that 1, your device OEM would care enough to update your device at all, and 2, that if they did, they would do it in a timely manner, preferably before the next new version of Android came out. Then, Google introduced Nexus devices, known today as the Pixel lineup. And if you think Google is making Pixel phones to sell hardware, you have not been paying attention. Google doesn't make money from hardware. Their goal was to eliminate as much fragmentation in their ecosystem as possible. The goal was not to sell phones, but instead to sell the promise of what Android could be. It set a new standard for what Android should look and feel like, and it certainly set the standard on when updates happen and how important those updates are. It taught consumers to no longer accept the ways of the other OEMs, and slowly but surely, they all started playing ball. And now, because of those early moves, every Android user benefits from that, regardless of what company you're buying a phone from. What Apple did at WWDC now lays the groundwork to shift the foundation of the entire industry. Artificial intelligence is inevitable. It is ultimately one of the most important advancements humanity has ever seen, and Apple has now set the standard for how personal it should be, how intentional it should be, but more importantly, how private AI should be. They're showing that artificial intelligence can, in fact, be private, and that will start to shift what consumers will accept from every other AI company ever. This is not just a win for Apple fans. This is a win for everyone that claims to love technology. This is a move that will trickle down for years to come, a moment we will look back at as a pivotal turning point for a form of technology that was a little bit foreign and a little bit scary if gone unregulated. Apple may take a while to adopt technology or even integrate new features that you think should have been there for 10 years. But to them, they do it for important reasons, sometimes, and that's what we're seeing here. Apple waited to pull the trigger on artificial intelligence because they knew just how powerful it could be in the right hands. This will be, or hopefully will be, everything and more that I've been hyping it up to be. It's going to be available in beta form when iOS 18, iPadOS 18, and macOS Sequoia land later in the fall. This really makes me hopeful, optimistic, and excited about the future of Apple and, well, the future of everything.